Saturday, February 28, 2026, was the day this ceased to sound like a diplomatic standoff and began to sound like war. Israel declared a preemptive strike on Iran, and shortly afterward, Donald Trump announced that the United States had launched major combat operations on Iranian territory. He said the strikes were aimed at Iran's missile potential and navy, and he framed the campaign as a forceful move intended to bring about the sukut of the regime and close Tehran's nuclear chapter. I'm Andrew Collins, and you're watching my channel. If you want more reporting like this, subscribe, comment, and share right now. That support helps this channel keep following stories that can hit both your security and your wallet. Trump's stated rationale was direct. He said the purpose was to protect the American people by removing immediate threats posed by the Iranian regime, which he described as exceptionally ruthless and dangerous. He argued that Iran is the world's largest state sponsor of terrorism and said it had only recently killed tens of thousands of its own citizens during street protests. He also repeated that the United States, and especially his administration, would never allow that regime to obtain nuclear weapons. In that framing, the U.S. military operation was large, ongoing, and designed to stop what he called a radical dictatorship from threatening America and its core national security interests. Reuters reported that the operation was reportedly codenamed Epic Fury, with the main focus placed on Iranian missile systems and naval forces. Trump also made a point of saying he expected resistance, which meant from the beginning that American casualties were part of the risk. The first reports from inside Iran came quickly. In central Tehran, strikes were reported around University Street and near Jumhuri, while additional explosions were said to have hit the northern part of the city in the Sedkan Dam area. Iranian media also described attacks beyond the capital, including in the western province of Idlib. There were also reports of blasts near the complex belonging to the supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, meaning around his offices and principal facilities in the city center. His residence was said to have been reduced to rubble. Even so, Iran's supreme leader Ali Khamenei was reportedly not in Tehran and had already been moved to a safe location. The shock spread immediately beyond Iran itself. Flights from Warsaw to Dubai were canceled until March 8th, and most flights bound for the Middle East were canceled as well. Air traffic in that direction was effectively disappearing. So this was never just a distant war story. It was already becoming a conflict with consequences for travel, prices, and wider security. Because market speed matters in moments like this, I use the XTB app for investing so I can react as events move. If you do not yet know how to begin investing, use the code Bednarski. The details are in the description. And for those looking at the premium segment, Sandby Resort is presented as a luxury apartment hotel in Gizno, near Kowo Bzeg, just 50 meters from the beach in one of the best-known seaside destinations. The project includes hotel infrastructure, a swimming pool, spa zone, restaurants, a gym, kids club, and conference facilities, all of which support year-round rental demand. More than 75% of the apartments offer a sea view. It is being marketed as a blend of leisure and investment potential with returns of up to 8% annually. For the first 60 customers who complete the form and choose to purchase an apartment, that 8% is to be guaranteed from the date of the first payment, including during the construction phase. Full details are available through the link in the description, and the number of apartments is very limited. To understand how all of this reached open war, you have to go back to the point when the crisis still looked containable. In 2015, the JCPOA was signed, and the idea behind it was simple. Put the issue of Iran's nuclear bomb on hold for at least a decade. Iran accepted limits on uranium enrichment, cut down its stockpiles, and agreed to inspections. In return, it regained part of its access to the global economy, but the agreement was politically unstable almost from the start. In the United States, many Republicans treated it as a concession to the regime. In Iran, hardliners portrayed it as a trap set by the West. Once Donald Trump withdrew the U.S. from the deal in 2018 and sanctions returned, the mechanism that was supposed to keep the crisis under control began to unravel. Iran then escalated in stages. It first moved beyond the uranium stockpile limits, then pushed enrichment higher, and eventually reached 60% purity. That still did not amount to weapons-grade material, but technically it shortened the path to the military threshold. In Washington, discussion increasingly centered on breakout time, the brief window required to produce enough material for one warhead. According to American assessments, that window was shrinking fast. At the same time, Tehran continued building its missile program and testing systems with greater and greater reach. In January 2026, Iran announced a successful missile test, which, in Tehran's telling, could hit targets at a distance of around 10,000 kilometers. In the American interpretation, that meant something much more serious than a regional capability. It meant a possible direct threat to U.S. territory. Exactly how close Iran was to a nuclear weapon remains difficult to measure. Benjamin Netanyahu has spent almost 30 years warning that Iran is nearing that point. His line has been consistent. If Iran is not stopped, it could build nuclear weapons very quickly. He has said it could be a year. He has argued that Iran possesses the resources and preserved knowledge needed to assemble a bomb fast, if it decides to do so. He has also warned that they are only weeks away from enough fissile material for an entire arsenal of nuclear bombs, that in about 6 months they could have around 90% enriched uranium required for an atomic bomb, and that Iran is preparing to produce 25 atomic bombs a year, or 250 bombs within a decade. He has gone further by saying that within 3 to 5 years, Iran could produce nuclear weapons entirely on its own, without importing anything. In an earlier argument tied to Saddam, he warned that once Saddam has nuclear weapons, terrorist networks will have them too, and that the next step would be a nuclear bomb in the World Trade Center. He also claimed that removing Saddam and his regime would bring enormous positive consequences for the entire region. Whatever the exact timeline may have been, Iran has undoubtedly advanced both in the nuclear sphere and in developing more effective armaments. It is also important to remember that leaders of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps have repeatedly used slogans such as "Death to America." This hostility did not appear overnight. Relations between the United States and Iran have been strained for decades. After the so-called Islamic Revolution in Iran in 1979, the country became a strictly Islamic state. The Shah was removed, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini took power, and Iran was remade as an Islamic republic grounded in religious law, meaning Sharia. That turn was especially dramatic because Iran had earlier been a secular state with close cooperation with the United States. It had been described as energetic, fast-growing, and full of construction and development. Its capital was thriving. Women were even playing football. It was seen as a symbol of radical change against deeply rooted taboos, habits, and prejudices. At a time when many monarchies had already fallen, Mohammad Reza Shah came to the throne. Iran still preserved its constitutional tradition and had the oldest constitution in all of Asia. It remained a monarchy. The decisive break came in November 1979, when Iranian students took over the United States Embassy in Tehran and held 52 American diplomats hostage. Even just before the war began, there were still diplomatic contacts. After recent meetings, including the one held in Geneva on February 26th, both sides spoke of progress, but neither side had resolved the issue of Iran's nuclear program. Meanwhile, for several weeks, the United States had been concentrating military force around the Persian Gulf, and the scale of the equipment sent there was described as comparable to, or even larger than, what had been assembled before the Iraq War. That deployment may have been slowed by a failure in the sanitary systems aboard the USS Gerald Ford. After repairs in Crete, the ship then moved toward the Gulf near Israel, and later on Saturday, the strike on Iran began. Once the fighting started, it did not remain confined to Iranian territory. Reports emerged of shelling near the headquarters of the U.S. Fifth Fleet in Manama, while Iranian attacks were also reported against U.S. bases in the Gulf. As a result, more Middle Eastern states began raising their defense readiness levels. Authorities in Bahrain said that some missiles had been intercepted over the country, and temporary restrictions were introduced for air traffic in Mahneima. Up to that point, the United States Navy had not released a detailed statement on any possible losses in the area of responsibility of the United States Fifth Fleet, which is based in Bahrain and oversees naval operations in the Persian Gulf. In Qatar, where Al Udeid Air Base is located, residents reported hearing explosions, and the authorities temporarily shut the airspace. Similar accounts began coming from the United Arab Emirates. Around Al Dhafra Air Base and Al Bateen, the alert level was raised. In Abu Dhabi, officials confirmed that one person had died after debris from an intercepted missile fell to the ground. At the same time, the Israel Defense Forces said that more ballistic missiles had been launched from Iranian territory toward northern and central Israel. Air defense systems were activated in several parts of the country, and residents were instructed to stay in shelters. Preliminary information indicated that several people were killed in those strikes. The economic fallout arrived almost instantly. As soon as the first airstrike reports appeared, Brent crude oil surged by more than 12% in overnight trading and broke through psychological levels that had not been seen for months. Investors were pricing in not only the destruction itself, but also the possibility that the Strait of Hormuz could be shut, the narrow choke point through which around 20% of global oil supplies move. Iran has repeatedly warned that open war could lead it to block that route. Even a partial interruption in tanker traffic would likely mean sharply higher fuel prices in Europe and Asia. Gold, the traditional safe haven, started climbing, and gas prices rose as well. Airlines began rerouting away from the airspace over Iran, Iraq, and part of the Gulf. Insurance for ships in the region was already becoming more expensive, and that cost feeds directly into the transport price of raw materials and goods. Stock markets reacted with visible anxiety. Energy companies moved higher, but the broad global index fell as fears of escalation spread. Investors were not only worried about a regional war, they were also asking whether Hezbollah in Lebanon, Shia militias in Iraq, or even more Gulf states might be pulled in directly. A second battlefield was beginning to matter more with every passing hour: cyber war. Iran already has experience in cyber operations targeting energy and financial infrastructure. American security agencies were warning private companies about the possibility of attacks on power grids, banks, and logistics systems. Then comes the question of what Washington intends to do next. After attacks on their bases, the Americans would likely want to answer with even greater force, especially because Trump himself said the objective was to topple the regime. He pointed to a long record of violence to justify that position. He said Iranian forces killed and maimed hundreds of American soldiers in Iraq. He also said that in recent years, representatives of the regime had continued countless attacks on U.S. forces stationed in the Middle East, as well as on American warships and merchant vessels using international shipping routes. He called that massive terror and said it would no longer be tolerated. From Lebanon to Yemen and from Syria to Iraq, he argued, the regime had armed, trained, and financed terrorist militias. But if the U.S. operation were to succeed, another question would immediately move to the center of the story. Who takes power in Iran afterward? Among the possibilities being discussed is the son of the former Shah. Another appeal circulating around this conflict makes the moment sound even larger. It says decisive days are ahead, that the President of the United States has come to help the people, that this is a humanitarian intervention, and that the Islamic Republic is not the true Iran, but an apparatus of repression and a machine of killing. Yet even within that appeal, the final point is unmistakable. Despite outside help, ultimate victory would still depend on the people themselves. No one should expect any of this to end quickly. The consequences in the coming months could be severe. Next year will mark the centenary of the Chinese People's Liberation Army, and that matters because Xi Jinping may want to demonstrate his dominance by taking Taiwan. According to reports about American classified documents and expert opinions, that possibility is being taken seriously. Taiwan matters for another reason as well. TSMC is there, and it is the most important company producing semiconductors, which are essential in the race for dominance in artificial intelligence. From that perspective, Trump may want the issues of Iran and Russia settled before any potential war with China. That is, of course, speculation, but recent developments are beginning to fit together into a broader pattern. What is already clear is that this Middle East war could become much more dangerous than many people assume. And judging by the losses already suffered, Iran is unlikely to back down this time, because the moment no longer looks like a return to negotiations. The sense of escalation only deepened after one missile landed near the center of the UAE capital, Abu Dhabi. At the same time, Dubai's airport was moving through a real crisis because of canceled flights. So the danger of this conflict spilling into additional countries is not theoretical. It is real. And when the current situation in Lebanon is considered, together with Hezbollah groups emerging from underground, the range of possible outcomes becomes almost impossible to predict. That is also why we will keep tracking this story. We had already warned yesterday in my Facebook group that war could break out even today. If you want to follow information that may matter to both your safety and your wallet, then my Facebook page is worth checking, because yesterday it already gave an indication of what might happen today. The link is in the description. Before we close, like, subscribe, comment, and share if you want continued updates on this story. Pass this report along so more people can stay informed about what may come next. For now, that is where the situation stands. This conflict is no longer just about one set of strikes. It is already affecting transport, markets, energy, and the wider balance of power. Take care.